That's cool. What do we do now?
Say the pledge.
Say the pledge? Kurt, can you lead us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wrong heart, John.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Why do they call it the American flag?
Well, that's a good question, Trent. Tell me, what's the name of this ranch?
The Powderhorn,
Are there any other ranches around here?
the Tomahawk, and the Walkers.
And don't forget the war bonnet.
Oh yeah, that's right, the war bonnet.
Okay. Well, do those ranches all have a brand of their own?
Yes.
They do. Okay. Well, countries are kind of just like that. Every country calls itself by its own name. We call our country the United States of America because we're a bunch of different states. Then we call our family of people that live here, we call them Americans. So we have our own flag and we call it the American flag.
So our flag is kind of like our brand?
Yep.
That's right. You've got it, Kurt. Yes.
So why do we pledge allegiance to the flag?
Well, Kurt, do you understand what it means to be loyal to a ranch that you work for?
Well, if you work on this ranch, you have to fix fence, doctor cows, and stuff like that.
And don't forget about wrestlers either.
Yeah, Grandpa, did you hear they caught some wrestlers?
Your dad was telling me that. Being loyal to a ranch is very much the same thing as being loyal to your country. If you live in America, you need to be loyal to that country. Well, guys, tell you what, your mom said she was going to make some cookies. I think we need to take a break.
Last one, there's rotten egg. You're still a rotten egg.
You're a rotten egg.
Guys, hold it. Hold it, guys. Let's not get in a war over something so small.
How do wars get started, Grandpa?
How do wars start? Just about like this. This is how they start. When somebody is being unkind and selfish.
Have we had any soldiers in our family?
Yes, I would say we've had two famous soldiers. One was when our family still lived over in Scotland. He was so good that they gave him a great big chunk of land. The other was in World War II. It was your Uncle Tommy.
Can you tell us about him?
Yes, I can. In fact, I think your dad has got a book about him. Let's go to the house and find it. Guys, the war started, World War II started in 1939. It started because Germany and then later Japan wanted land and minerals that other people owned. And so they invaded those countries to try and take their land and minerals, just like I was telling you about selfishness and unkindness. Little by little, other countries tried to stop them. And so before long, nearly every major country in the world was choosing sides, which side of the war they were going to fight on. Now, America stayed out of the war as long as we could. Americans have never liked war. So we just stayed out of it. But on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese airplanes flew over top of Hawaii and dropped bombs where we have our ships parked at what we call Pearl Harbor. And they blew up all of our ships. It was a terrible disaster. The very next day, December 8th, 1941, America entered World War II. Well, by 1945, the war was nearly 6 years old. And Uncle Tommy wanted to join the war so that he could help stop the war before more people were killed.
How old were you then, Grandpa?
Now, I was only 1 year old. I was born in 1944. You're 11 now, Kurt. Uncle Tommy was just 7 years older than you are when he went off to war. And he joined the Navy. He was on what they call a cruiser.
Was it a big ship?
Well, really big. I mean, it was 610 feet long and 133 feet high. It was the fastest Navy cruiser ever built. It could go 38 miles an hour on a flat sea. But in order to go that fast, they had to make it lighter. Do you know that battleships, the sides on battleships, are 9 inches thick, and some of them are even 12 inches thick? But the boat that Uncle Tommy was on, the USS Indianapolis, only had 3-inch thick sides. That was so that it was lighter and it could go faster. But the reason that it could be lighter was that it was never on the outside of a fleet. If they had a whole bunch of ships in the ocean, they kept the Indianapolis in the center. So it was never designed to be alone. So on July 16th, 1945, they sent the Indianapolis on a secret mission. And it had to go so fast, no other ship could go with it. The ship went so fast that in 3 days, it went 2,405 miles. It set a world record for ship travel that has never been beaten in all of these years. But it was still only halfway to where it had to go. So it kept going, and it finally reached its port. And then it took a day off. It unloaded its secret cargo, and it took a day off. Captain McVeigh, that was the name of the ship's captain, he tried to find some other boats that could go home with him. Why? Well, because he didn't want to be out there all by himself with that thin boat because he might be attacked. So he wanted the Navy to give him some other boats to surround him for safety, but they couldn't find any. So on July 27th, he was ordered to start returning home. They left the early morning of July 28th. That was a Saturday. It was a hot day, really hot. Sunday was even hotter, 120 degrees. At nighttime, the cooks made a great big chicken dinner because the crew had been working so hard to get their secret mission done. The cooks thought we need to make them a really special deal. So they made this great big chicken dinner and they fed it to them. And about 9:30 at night, all the men were done eating and they went to bed. Just before they went to bed, a bugler came out onto the deck and he raised his bugle and he played a little melody that we call taps. It's the military's goodnight song.
What kind of job did Uncle Tommy do?
Uncle Tommy was not a big man. He was about 5'8", and he weighed about 170 pounds. But he was a farm boy, so he's real strong. So all the other guys called him Paul Bunyan. Well, his job was to run one of the great big diesel engines down in the bottom of the boat that made the boat move. He was an engine operator. That was what his job was. Now, we don't know if Uncle Tommy was on duty that night or not. But what we do know was that about 12 miles away, there was a Japanese submarine floating just 13 feet under the water, sneaking along, looking for American ships. He had his periscope up. A periscope is an iron tube that sticks up out of the water and has a little head on it. And he can look and see what he can see. But it was so dark that he couldn't see anything. But a submarine also has an ear, a listening device they call sonar. And it was listening to the water. And it could hear a rattling that it knew wasn't fish. It turns out later they figured out that the rattling was the men washing dishes in the bottom of the ship. And so he moved closer. He moved in closer and closer, trying to find out what it was that was making that noise. And at 6 miles, he could see the American ship out there. He began moving closer.
Are they gonna shoot Uncle Tommy? I don't think I want to hear this.
Trent, do you really want me to stop?
Yes, but not really.
I grew up hearing this story, and I think it's probably good, even though it's a hard story, I think it's probably good that every American know how much it cost other Americans to keep us free so that we can live in the freedom that we have as Americans today, huh?
What happens next, Grandpa?
What happened next was that as the Japanese submarine got up to 2 miles away, he realized that he couldn't possibly miss at that close a range. He loaded 6 torpedoes into his firing devices, and he sent them out, boom, 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 3 seconds apart.
Did they all hit the Indianapolis?
No, they didn't all hit. Only 2 of them hit. But it was 5 minutes after midnight when the first one hit. Everybody was sound asleep except the guys still running the engines. They were sound asleep when the first one hit. It blew a hole 60 foot in diameter in the front of the boat. The second one hit just a few seconds later, and it hit the part of the boat where they keep all their own ammunition. And so all the ammunition started going off in the bottom of the boat. Men sleep stacked up in a boat, and they were thrown out of their beds and onto the floor, and a lot of men were injured just getting thrown onto the floor and hitting metal pipes and things like that. They began running every place. The electricity was all out in the boat, and it was a dark night, remember, so they couldn't see anything except what the fire did. The fire lit the sky up. The men are just wearing their underwear and their t-shirts because they were all in bed. They were all in bed. They had no time to get dressed. They grabbed the fire hoses and they ran to the fire, and when they got ready to run them, there was no water because the power was gone. They couldn't produce any water. The boat was moving about 17 miles an hour. And so with that great big hole in the front of the boat, it was scooping up water. And as it scooped up water, the old boat started laying over on its side, and when it did, men started getting thrown into the water. The captain didn't abandon ship right away because they weren't even able to figure out what had happened or what was going to happen. And the captain couldn't get on the microphone and tell people what to do because the power was gone. So there they were in this terrible, terrible mess. The ship sank completely in just 12 minutes. 12 minutes from the first moment that they woke up until the ship was gone completely into the water.
Did Uncle Tommy get into the water?
Yes, we know that Uncle Tommy got into the water. The trouble was nobody came to rescue him.
Why not?
Well, the radio shack was blown up partly too. They did manage to get out an SOS message, but it never really got to where it needed to go. And so rescue never came. Now the problem was when you jump into salt water, the ocean's salt water, you can't drink salt water. If you do, it'll kill you. In 3 or 4 days, it'll kill you. So some of these men got so thirsty they drank salt water, and that killed them. Another problem was that one of the torpedoes had blown up the fuel tanks, had made a hole in the fuel tank. And 50,000 gallons of diesel fuel flooded out onto the ocean, and it all formed a great big puddle. And it was that thick. So when these men jumped off onto the water, they landed in diesel fuel. And for the next 4 days, they floated in diesel fuel. You know how when you fill your dad's tractor with diesel fuel, how it stings and burns your hands? All right, that's exactly what was happening. It was in their eyes. It was everything. They grabbed a hold of debris or anything out there.
Grandpa, what's debris?
Debris is pieces of junk that would float. They got on any kind of junk they could get. And then most of the men, when they got into the salt water, they just kind of floated along by themselves, and they thought they were all by themselves. They didn't realize there was anybody else out there. In the morning, they started getting together in groups. They found each other. Captain McVeigh, getting off the boat nearly last, was only ever able to find 6 or 7 other men. And he thought that's all that survived the entire thing because that boat was moving 17 miles an hour, and so they kept getting off at different places. After that first night, the next morning they were happy that the sun came up and it felt better. But then it got to where the sun was blinding them, and they started not being able to see, and so they tore pieces out of their t-shirts and they made blindfolds out of them. When it came nighttime, it cooled off, and that was good, but then it got cold, and they started shivering in the water.
Grandpa, if it was so hot in the day, wouldn't they want it to cool down?
Yeah, cold was good. I mean, cold was nice. They'd been so hot. But you see, your body temperature, Kurt, is 98.6 degrees, and the water was only 85 degrees. And so that gives you what you call hypothermia. Your body starts cooling down. And then your mind doesn't work right. The second morning, as they saw the sun starting to come up, all of a sudden some men started screaming. And what had happened was that during the night, sharks had smelled the blood in the water. And they followed that blood until they found all the survivors, and they just attacked them. They made it through the day. And then they came into that third morning. And by the third morning, they were beginning to see things, and they were beginning to kind of lose their minds. And when they looked at each other, they didn't see somebody that they knew. They saw an enemy soldier. They thought he was a Japanese. And in 10 minutes, a fight broke out. And in 10 minutes, 50 guys killed each other. By the fourth morning, most of the men had given up hope. They didn't believe anybody was going to come to rescue them. And they had lost all hope. And some of the men started taking off their life jackets. And they would simply swim out into the ocean until they couldn't swim any farther and they would drown because they thought help wasn't coming. But then a miracle happened. I mean, it really was. It was a fantastic miracle. There was a guy, he was a Navy pilot. His name was Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn. And he was sent out, flying out over the ocean to look for Japanese submarines. He was trying to radio, but his radio wasn't working just right because the antenna got hooked on the back of the airplane somehow. So the men couldn't seem to get it undone, and so Lieutenant Gwynn left the cockpit and he walked back to see if he could help. And as he did, he walked around the open bomb door that's in the bottom of the airplane. And as he walked around that open bomb door, he looked down and he saw this great big puddle of oil in the water. And he looked real close and he could see men waving and screaming at him because they thought maybe he'd come to look for him, and he hadn't. But now he had seen him. And so the rescue was started.
What happened next?
Yeah.
Lieutenant Gwynn knew that if he just flew away and went back and sent help, the men would think that they had been deserted again, and more of them would give up. So Lieutenant Gwynn stayed there as long as he had fuel, and he just circled around and around all of those men. Well, help came because he managed to get his radio working, and help came. And it turned out to be a great rescue, but it was the greatest naval disaster in American history. There would never been a disaster anywhere near that big.
So how many men did survive?
317 men. That's how many men survived. And about 879 men died, either on the boat or in the water before they were rescued.
Was Uncle Tommy still alive?
We know that Uncle Tommy almost made it. He almost made it to the end. The reason we know that is because after the war was over, a guy came and knocked on Grandpa and Grandma's door, and he said, "I was your son Tommy's very close friend, and I was with him when he died, almost at rescue. But he said, I won't tell you how he died. I just want you to know that he did die so that you don't expect him to come walking through the door someday." So naturally, our family has always figured that somehow Uncle Tommy probably got killed by a shark or something terrible, we don't know what. We did learn what the secret mission was. The Indianapolis was carrying the biggest bomb the world had ever seen. And about 6 days after the rescue was completed, that bomb was dropped on Japan. It was such a big bomb that it killed 140,000 people when it exploded. It was a terrible thing. And yet, it brought about the surrender of Japan, and the war ended.
I hate the Japanese.
Trent, the Bible says not to hate anybody, doesn't it, Grandpa?
That's right, Kurt. The Bible says you don't hate anybody. You don't hate anybody, Trent. In fact, the Bible says that you have to have mercy, kindness on your enemy. And that was one of the greatest things, guys, about the end of World War II. Because our general, a great general, General Douglas MacArthur, was assigned to go to Japan and to help those people become friends of America's. And over the years, they have become some of our very most wonderful friends that we have in the world today. Guys, you need to know, your Uncle Tommy and all those other guys with him were great American heroes, and we can be glad for what they did.
The 4th of July is a celebration. It's a celebration of the birth of America. It's a celebration of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. You have stories in your family, just like the stories of my great Uncle Tommy, and I would want to encourage you to share those stories with your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, so that they would always know and understand the cost of freedom and the responsibility that comes with it. Thank you so much for joining us this week, and until next time, may God bless the trails you ride. And from my family to yours, Happy 4th of July!
I'm sorry, Grandpa. I don't hate anybody. I'm glad I'm American.
Oh, bless your heart, guys. Let's go.